Thank you. So in the interest of time, I think we will kick it into high gear, but to kind of recap just a little bit, as far as the questions go from our audience, if you do have a question, you're more than welcome to raise your hand a bit, and during our panel discussion, we will kind of pepper our discussion with any questions you have. At the end of our session, we will have some dedicated time for Q&A, but with that said, if you have a question, raise your hand and we'll go from there. So I think our first question will be for Renee, and I think, in general, we all understand that government and industry networks are being attacked on a pretty much ongoing basis, 24/7, 365, and that defense is something that was really the beginning of cybersecurity. But talk a little bit about emerging threats and some of the things that we've seen maybe over the last year or so that have kind of taken cybersecurity to a new level in terms of the things that we have to react against and the things that we need to protect.
Well, APTs are ever evolving, so you're always dealing with advanced persistent threats. One of the things that is important to us at the department to keep up with that, because cyber changes daily. We've set up a technical review board at the department that is made up of cyber professionals from each one of our domains that represent those 10 mission critical skills. Therefore, as threats change and different skill sets are needed, that information is fed into us via that cyber technical review board, and we can change the information, recruitment information, training information, or anything like that on a dime. So it's very important that you keep a very close relationship with the people who are hands on the keyboard, the folks who are actually doing it, because cyber is a little different than accounting or a different profession that changes very slowly. So we had to institute a mechanism, a feedback loop, in which to get that information quickly and be able to adapt quickly.
And one of the things that kind of comes to my mind is attacks against infrastructure. For the longest time, it was all about attacks against both classified and unclassified government networks and contractor networks. But lately, the president has talked a lot about attacks against infrastructure as being something that's brought up. It also kind of blurs the line between who's responsible. Attack on a power grid is not necessarily just responsibility of the folks that are managing the grid. That's a national security issue. Mr. McDuffie, can you get in a little bit deeper about attacks against infrastructure and what we might be doing to help protect against that, and the types of education that might be necessary for those kind of defenders?
Sure. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is the fact that people don't understand how much their lives are dependent on the various critical infrastructure sectors. There's some 16 of them that have been identified by the Department of Homeland Security. And to their credit, a few years ago, they recognized the cybersecurity issues related to each of those critical infrastructures as kind of ubiquitous. It goes across all of them, so they stood up a cross-sector cybersecurity group, so each group wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel around cyber as they approach that. So now there's a single group that looks at those issues across all those sectors, everything from energy to finance to healthcare, electronic medical records. We got the smart grid coming online. All of these areas not only present threat vectors, but they present opportunities for employment. You think about the utility companies. There's some 4,004 different utility companies across the country. As we stand up at NIST, very heavily involved in standards around the smart grid that's coming on board. There'll be devices in every home in the country that will present challenges, which means that not only the individuals need to be aware of that, so they're practicing proper cyber hygiene in their own home space, but the utility companies are going to need trained personnel to function in that space as well. One of the things that I always like to mention, though, in these settings, as we focus on the threat vectors that are out there that are very real, and certainly something that demands the attention at the national level, because you're right, that it is a national security issue. 85% of the critical infrastructure in this country is controlled by the private sector. So you have that dichotomy of who's responsible, and certainly from a business sense, they're going to be the first responders, and whatever the government can do to help and assist is going to be crucial. But the cybersecurity motivation is much broader than just defensive networks. If you think about innovation, economic development, the advance of the STEM enterprise, you can't do any of that without computers. You can't do physics, biology, you can't do mathematics, engineering anymore unless you've got a computer network supporting that. So in a real sense, cybersecurity becomes the underlying enabler of the entire STEM enterprise. So, you know, if you keep talking about the threats all the time, you end up in this kind of Chicken Little scenario where people start to tune it out. Sky's falling, well, it hasn't fallen yet. We haven't had a cyber Pearl Harbor yet, you know. Maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, but if you forget about that for the moment and just think about advancing the sciences, advancing economic development, cybersecurity is a really important field that needs to underpin and support those activities, and it actually becomes attractive to a whole different set of students who won't necessarily be thrilled about being in this kind of quasi-warfare mentality, but would really like to contribute more in a positive way to society as a whole, which opens it up to that whole other set of individuals who are focused in other areas. It gets to the point that Montana and others have made about, you know, we really need, it's a team sport, and you really need participation from all of the different sectors.
So Linda, is industry yet being called upon to help protect infrastructure? It seems at this point, whatever the system is, whether it's banking or electrical or waterworks or whatever the case may be, it's protected by employees within. Do you know at this point if industry is being called in to assist with some of the expertise that it has?
HP actually partners with all of the agencies here, so we are definitely on the line. We have employees, we have contracts. We're very well connected. Our cyber security team, actually I got to meet with them this week. Very impressive group of people. So I would say absolutely HP is a definite partner with everybody on this panel.
I think we'll move on to the human capital challenge. You know, cybersecurity is an interesting discipline in that some of the most skilled cybersecurity gurus have built up their own skills and had to engage in, let's say, less than ethical things that they've done on the web to test their skills, probing systems, gaining access to networks that they probably shouldn't be in. But there's no better way necessarily to test your skills. You can't simulate that kind of thing. So, Celine, I wanted to ask you, when you look at a security clearance and the fact that some of the activities that cybersecurity professionals are doing to train themselves or in the process of training themselves could potentially prohibit them from obtaining a clearance, how do we kind of get over that hurdle?
It takes a lot of education because you do want that individual that's hacking into, you know, Twitter, and you want that person. They shouldn't tell you though, perhaps, you know, that this is what they're doing, but it takes a lot of education. We all have to be very careful and cautious, especially with clearances and, you know, protecting our government and partnering. But I do think that education and being aware that this is happening, and so you want to bring in those people to your organization so they can help you fight the bad guys. But it starts with all these programs that you guys are doing that I was very impressed to hear about today. You know, they're laying the groundwork, so it's a matter of organizations like HP to take that on and drive it to the next steps, yeah.
And there is a platform actually now for young people who are interested in the dark arts, if you will, that they can engage in without going to the wrong side of the law. Things like the Air Force Cyber Patriot competitions that are out there focused at the high school and middle school level, where they give kids challenges in cybersecurity and allow them to participate and practice those skills in an ethical and controlled environment. You're seeing these cyber challenges at the college level as well. U.S. Cyber Challenge, Karen Evans worked Cyber Camp, Cyber Aces, the CCDC, Maryland Cyber Watch. There's some 60 different organizations now across the country doing cybersecurity challenges. And in fact, the National Science Foundation has recently given a grant to the University of Cal Poly out in California, where they're looking to bring all these different groups together and form a federation. So we spoke about March Madness and what's happening now in basketball. And the hope is that someday you'll have a March Madness around cybersecurity challenges where you have these regular competitions, teams. There's already a Cyber Olympiad that's an international competition between countries. And these events are being sponsored more and more by private sector folks who actually end up hiring teams and individuals directly as a result of their participation in these challenges.
Yeah, and the foundation to every one of these things is a type of a virtual range environment where people can learn and hone their skills. And this environment, if we want to elevate the skills and raise the bar even of our current existing workforce, this is where performance-based training and assessment needs to be the foundation of growing the skill sets of that workforce. And they have to be able to operate on, learn and improve their so I'm going to go a little bit militaristic here, their tactics, techniques, and procedures in an environment where they can make mistakes. One of the major issues is you can't practice or see and do anything live with the latest threat on a live network because you can't control it. So creating a range environment where federal employees, some of the universities and colleges are doing this, we're actually working really hard with them to ensure that students who are going through these programs are learning and working on these ranges to hone their skills, not just in competition, but just on a daily basis as part of their curriculum. I have a project that I'm funding with another school out in California right now that is building a range environment so that aligns to the knowledge, skills, and abilities within NICE. And college professors are going to be able to, once at the end of the class, of whatever class they're teaching in cybersecurity, put the kids onto this range and see whether they actually learned and can perform they can perform what they learned in classes. So the range is the foundation. And even within federal government, we need federal employees, we need state employees, even private sector employees to be able to do their continuous education in a range environment. The military has done a great job. The DoD has done a great job with doing this, and I think it's time that we adopt some of these things. And people talk, the Pearl. We may not have had our Pearl Harbor event, but you got to remember the tactics. This is death by 1,000 cuts. Okay, and if you probably know who I'm talking about when I quote death by 1,000 cuts. If you don't, it's a Chinese philosopher named Sun Tzu. These little events that occur are constantly tested, are constantly chipping away at our foundation. It's almost like the enamel on your teeth. We need to find some way to restore the enamel, the strength. And we can do that through by constantly evolving performance-based training and assessment. Let the skills are perishable. That's the key thing in cybersecurity. Skills are perishable. And they constantly change.
I do want to say that at HP, we're really lucky. We partner with HP Labs, and all of our big campus sites do have labs on site that are in a secured server environment where they're hacking into us to make sure that we're not doing anything employee-wise to allow threats in. And it is very continuous, and it's an amazing thing to be, we do tours if anybody wants to come in and check out our lab environments.
Yeah, scenario-based testing, I think, is a real game changer when it comes to training in the cyber world. It's the quickest way to determine your frequent flyers from your pilots. It's very important to make sure, especially in some of the areas that we're dealing with as it relates to those mission-critical skills, there's some positions that you need in which you're trying to grow the pipeline so you can have a more junior person there. But when you are bringing in a person at that at that advanced mission-critical skill level, it's very important that that person can actually prove can they really do this? You kind of sort of want to know if the pilot is going to fly the plane, can he do it? Can he or she do it? The same thing in the cyber realm. You want to make sure that that person has the skills that are needed and that you have the opportunity to see that they can perform the skills. Now, the challenge is, because it changes so often, we talked about that earlier, is making sure that the scenario-based training is keeping up with the threats so that it constantly stays fresh. But it is truly the game changer when it comes to training, because paper and pencil training for advanced, persistent threats it's just not going to cut it. It's not going to get us where we need to be. It's not going to make sure that, as somebody stated earlier, we have employers that say, oh, I get people and they come in and they don't have the skills that I thought they said because the resume said this, but I really need them to be able to execute in this fashion. Well, with scenario-based testing, you will know whether or not they can do it or not. And then if you can continually have them participate in scenario-based testing and training, it makes sure that you have an employee that is advancing their skills across that particular spectrum.
Dr. McDuffie, do you think that security clearance guidelines for cybersecurity professionals should potentially be reduced in order to allow a greater quantity of those folks to kind of fill in the gaps, and understanding that some of those in the younger generation may have done things online that they consider okay but are technically illegal? Do we relax security clearance guidelines for cybersecurity professionals in particular?
That's a really interesting question. I've had a security clearance for probably 30 years or so, and the focus changes over time. I don't think a relaxing of the lowering the bar is the answer. I think more efficiency in the process of moving people through to get a clearance is really what needs to happen. My experience has been, particularly with young people who are interested in this field, that they know, that you can't do certain things, and then they know what the rules are. The biggest detractor is you graduate from school and you're looking for a job, and then you find out the security clearance might take 18 months, to get in place. So that's a major hurdle. They'll end up working somewhere else sooner. So finding a way to expedite the process, I think, is a much better solution. I'd hate to see the bar lowered, particularly with things like the Snowden effect, and the insider threat is a major issue in any security operation. So you don't want to lower the bar, and you at the same time you can't have the bar so high that nobody qualifies. Sure. And I don't think that's the case today. I think the constraints that they look at are pretty reasonable. It's just the amount of time, resources that are being applied to get people through the process.
Mm-hmm. I agree with them on that. Mm-hmm. At the department, our chief security officer is an integral part of our process. So as we are trying to improve on our standards in hiring from a skill set perspective, you have to work with human capital and with your security officers to make sure that those folks move through the process quickly. And one of the things that we did to try to make sure that it happened was to make sure that different people who were part of the process understood the mission. We didn't want our human capital people who were working with the actual documents to not understand what that document really meant. We wanted them to understand that the person that you are working on hiring here is coming in here, excuse me, to perform a mission. And we wanted them to understand what that mission was. It's a lot easier for people when what they're working with has more meaning, and it's not just a piece of paper. So we took the time to meet with our human capital professionals and go over with them what some of the cyber missions were. So when they saw that come through on that document, they knew, oh, this is an agent who's going to do this. We need to make sure that this happens quickly. Oh, this is one of the mission critical skills. We need to get this into the pipeline quickly and expedite this.
I have one question from the audience.
Yes, I was at a meeting earlier this month, and I was speaking with a lady who is an administrator at a local university where they put people through a cybersecurity program and have many, many graduates from that program. She expressed a frustration that about half of their people don't get placed in cybersecurity jobs, even though they have the education, because they don't have clearances in their background. And she was frustrated trying to figure out, how do I get my kids to have backgrounds that are cleared so they can make them more marketable? And I was wondering, maybe Ms. Appleby, does HP, or are you aware of other organizations, they have some sort of a program to bring these kids into the field even though they don't have yet clearances?
So this is actually good question for me, because we just changed our model. So we were hiring the experienced skill set for quite some time, and over the course of the past 8 months, we've flipped the domino effect, where we're bringing in interns, and we're working at getting them in at a lower level clearance as they do their internship with us. And the goal for an internship program with HP is that we're going to get you in, sophomore year, and then junior year, and then senior year. And by the time that you've put in 3 years, we're working on your background, because it does take a long time, and that's not HP's fault. It's paperwork, right? So it's a matter of bringing them at an early age, teaching them different skills within our, for big data, cybersecurity, getting them very well educated in all realms of technology so that they're comfortable, and then they can decide where they want to go based on the contract availabilities upon graduation.
We currently have a program at the Department of Homeland Security. It's called our Cyber Student Volunteer Initiative, where we're placing 116 students from 2-year and 4-year institutions across the country in our field offices. Some will be in our forensics labs, within our ICE labs, within Coast Guard, and they will all be doing cybersecurity work, hands-on. They get to see what is actually taking place. So we're hoping to accomplish 2 things by providing that awareness to them and also bringing them into the process of getting their first clearance, be it a lower level clearance, right, but begin to initiate that process with them.
There's another issue that the information age generation, our millennials need to understand. And that is the effect of social media and what is going on, and their deep desire to share everything that they're doing. And so they're now most employers are looking at Facebook pages. Many universities are looking at Facebook pages of students or potential hirees. So, there has to be a little bit of a recognition that it's not just getting a clearance. People are going to have trouble finding jobs because of their activities that they're bragging about on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and things like that. So there's a website that people can use called Clearable. You type in your Facebook page, and it'll scrub your Facebook page for activities that would be considered not socially acceptable type things that can get that stuff off their pages. I know particular one example of a young girl who had applied to Sarah Lawrence University. And if you know who Sarah Lawrence University is, it's the original Harvard for women. And she had a 4.0, she had over 2,100 on her combined SAT 3 scores. She was a lock to Sarah Lawrence. And she got turned down. And her friend, who applied too with much significantly different scores, got accepted. And her mother, upset, called the university and said, and their response was, we looked at your daughter's Facebook page, and we decided she's not the type of person that we want in our school. Wow, what a slap in the face. But that emphasizes that. And one of the things that I tell my 5 children is, I can put a big poster out in the front yard and tell everybody what you're doing. Would you like me to do that? Oh, no. I said, so why are you putting it on Facebook or Twittering about it?
It's true.
So there's a dynamic there that it's just not about clearances. It's about character. We hire people number one for clearances, we hire people to, what happened in the background, if you're honest up front and you tell everybody, tell most people what you did, that's not the issue. They're looking for somebody who has integrity. It's when you don't tell somebody, or there's something that you can be blackmailable for or something, that's the key. It's not necessarily the past, it's are you an honest person and will we be able to trust you in the future? Do you have integrity? That's the key to the clearance.
Exactly. The clearance adjudicative standards always talk about coercion, and can this person be coerced? So social media plays a big part of that if you're exposing yourself. In the interest of time, let's move on to our next topic. We want to talk about personnel standards for cybersecurity competency. And we've mentioned that cybersecurity is very unique in the fact that different from software development or databases or other things in technology, cybersecurity is the most rapidly changing field. How do we make sure that our cybersecurity workforce is competent and is up to date on the threats, and how do we set the standards as we move along? We have current standards for everything that we know about cybersecurity, but when you get into some of the new threats, there are no standards, there are no requirements that the government has put forth. Dr. McDuffie, how do we address that?
So refresh, continuous learning, lifelong learning. This is a mantra that I talk to a lot to young people, particularly just a few weeks ago I spoke at a high school in Maryland. Probably it was their career day, and I think I probably spoke to maybe 80% of the student body as they rotated through this session. And the idea that a lot of young people have is like, man, I'll be so glad when I get out of school and I'll never have to worry about learning anything new again. I'll never have to be in a classroom again. That's so wrong, and trying to get them to understand that if you're going to maintain your credibility, your standard, you have to realize that you're going to be in class forever. You're always going to be learning, whether it's in a formal setting or an informal setting or on-the-job training. It's essential, and particularly in a field like cybersecurity, it is so rapidly changing. I remember when I was at the university and teaching computer science, which a lot of the underlying technology for cybersecurity, clearly 50% of my time was spent just reading journals, reading what was happening in the field, trying to stay current with what was going on. And to this day, I mean, that's still, I count good days and bad days as days that I learned something new versus days that I didn't. And so if I go through a day and don't learn anything new, it really is a failure in my eyes. So I try to impress that on people that you have to really focus on being a lifelong learner. The accreditation community, to their credit, your SANS, ISC Squared, CompTIA, they're all focusing on, you have to come back and get your continuing education points. You have to keep your certification current by continuing to take education courses.
Speaking.
You had a question.
I had a comment about clearances. I totally agree about the process needing to be expedited. However, I think related to the Facebook and social media comment you made, millennials and young people coming out of universities oftentimes think that clearances are a right to get their job, and they need to understand that it's a privilege and it will take time, and those are the people that we want working in this, those that understand that, those that just believe it's a right. Maybe we don't want those people.
No, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we do in our outreach to students is to try to help them understand the hiring process. Help them understand some of the rules and why some of the rules are in place. And not just to give them resume help. A lot of kids get, let me help you just with your resume. Well, we try to give them that, but we also talk to them and try to manage their expectations as it relates to the hiring process, and to explain to them the differences in the federal hiring process and the commercial hiring process. And as you said, most of them don't understand. It's a lot easier, especially when it comes to some of the rules in the human capital space in the federal government, when you can explain to them why some of the rules are there. Then they can understand. Now that doesn't excuse the fact that we take too long to execute against that rule. So we need to work to improve the process but it's an easier pill to swallow when they can understand, oh, this is here for this reason. So now let's make sure we put a process in place that moves accurately, because you don't want to move so quickly, especially when it comes to clearances, that you don't do a good job. That's not a good thing for any of us. So you want to do a good job and make it work as quickly as possible.
So, so far we've talked a fair amount about, educational requirements and what we can do to get people trained, to get them into the workforce. Training and certification obviously is a big part of it, but when we talk about building the skilled labor pool over the past 12 months, what we've seen is that working for the government, working for the contracting community is no longer exciting or sexy. It's the past 12 months have shown people that the government and industry community has actually gotten a bad name. So more than just training and certification, how do we overcome the public relations issue that's going on now? If someone says, I'm going to work for the government, it's no longer seen as a really great and positive thing in many parts of the country. It's seen as a negative. How do we overcome that?
You're absolutely right. And that's one of our missions, is to give the wow factor for some of the jobs that we have. Most students don't know, and we have adults that don't even know what really happens at Department of Homeland Security. What do they do from a cyber perspective? And so, again, for us, we try to go out and give them the wow factor, help them understand, meet them at their need, meet them where they are, and have conversations at their level so that they can understand what activities are actually taking place. As I said earlier, sometimes I start with the cell phone. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I think I'm going to have to surgically remove the phone from her hand at some point. But that's their world. So then when I talk to them about the labs, the forensics labs, and the mobile labs that we have within CBP, and how they utilize that technology and what actually happens with that technology, even from a criminal perspective and from a technological perspective. The kids are like, wow, you can really do that? Oh, you can never really destroy the phone? Oh, they can go in and get this information off of the chip after it's burnt? Oh, they have ovens that can really dry the phone? All of those things are to help make it a little more exciting for them. It's almost like, some of you all in this room might not remember this, but I got a few years on me. I'm a little old. I remember when I was in elementary school and someone would wheel in the big television.
Yeah.
You remember? They would wheel in the big TV and we would watch. I know I took a few of you all back. You would watch, NASA would launch the rocket.
Yes.
And it was so exciting. Now, not that I knew everything that they were doing, but I was excited to see the men and women there with the headsets, and you would see them talking to each other, and it looked so secretive and exciting, and you would see the rocket launch. Well, we have to do that with cyber. We have to make it exciting for them in a way for which they can understand.
And part of that, whether it's federal government or national, it's making it exciting on the media that they know and use. So, and even TMP has done some wonderful work with the military on getting jobs advertised. And and I'll tell you that USA Jobs is not the most sexiest website. I'm sorry, it is cumbersome. It's not reaching out to the target audience that we want. They don't want to use it. There's not an app for it that does it right. So we need, when we look at going out to tackling this generation, to getting them, making it sexy, and everything like that, we need to go and work in that environment. We need to go and do that and make it and show videos and get things on YouTube and things that they look at and are attracted to every day to make things exciting. And as Renee was just saying, there's some there are cool things that you can't do anywhere else but in the federal government. And we need to
There
talk, to what extent we can and highlight those things. That's what'll bring people in. And I know that, there's been some negative publicity on certain things, but, those things are overcomable. We just need to tackle
Yeah,
it.
and every job and every person in human resources or recruiting always has a challenge to make their job sound interesting. And I think DHS in particular has done a good job at trying to make people understand what they're doing and why it's relevant and why it's exciting. But over the past 12 months, the issue has not become, I'm looking for exciting work. The issue has become more about is the government and the contracting community the bad guy? And this is definitely the Snowden effect. This is definitely the NSA effect. How do we start to let people know that the government is the good guy?
Let me speak to that. Yeah, I worked inside NSA, and a number of us here have been inside the intelligence community, and certainly there is a Snowden effect now, but a couple of points to be made. First, only 4% of the cybersecurity professionals in this country work for the federal government. So that's the first thing to be said. If you want to work cybersecurity, you don't have to think that the federal government's the only place to go work. There's plenty of other places to go work, as you well know. The other thing is, years ago, 10, 20 years ago, there were lots of private sector laboratories like Bell Labs and other really famous institutions where you could go if your focus was research, R&D, to do really exciting cutting edge work. You could do it in the private sector. Not so much anymore. Those labs, because of economic turns and other models, have kind of gone away. So now, if you're a technologically savvy individual, a student who's excited about cutting edge science, and you want to be involved in that, the only place really that you can do that kind of work, particularly in the cyber sphere, is at one of the national labs. NSA, for example, hires more mathematicians than any other organization in the world. They're at the cutting edge of what's happening technologically in cybersecurity. 10, 12 years ago when I was running the Scholarship for Service program, probably 80% of the graduates of that program were going to work for NSA. And it was because NSA has a black budget and could hire them, but they understood the need before anybody else did, because that's their business, that's their job. And the rest of the federal government hadn't really caught up yet that they needed these kind of professionals as well. Today, that percentage is down to about 30% because the rest of the government has stepped up. But still, the premier students out there in that program, their premier job destination was NSA, because they knew that that's where the technical skill set comes from. The people who think about federal government as being the bad guys, in my view, and it's probably skewed because of my, what I've done in my life, but I think they're the ones on the outside who have never worked for a federal agency, who don't realize that the people at NSA are you and me, just like everybody else, have the same kind of privacy concerns and issues about conspiracy theories, and they're just like everybody else. And they're doing their job as professionals, and they do a great job to the greatest extent. And so it still is our government. We kind of get the government that you vote for.
We happen to work there, but it's our government.
Absolutely. So definitely not the bad guys.
Isn't this still an education factor as we go all across the board, whether we're talking about human capital and educating youngsters at the high school and then into the college level and then the professional level in terms of what we do, what's required, how to get there, and making it sexy. But we're also talking about education as to what the various three-letter agencies do in a manner that we can describe it to them. So to me, this whole foundation starts with education. How do we get it out there so folks of this particular generation, I'm a boomer and I'm very intense about this, how do we get others educated about this to where we can get to a point where we're replenishing the workforce and it's self-perpetuating?
So that idea about broadly sprinkling cybersecurity across the curriculum, the idea that you can be in a civics class in high school talking about the nature of the government and have cybersecurity aspects and ethics being talked about in that class is exactly what needs to happen across the curriculum. People who are studying political science, people who are studying social anthropology, cultural anthropology, All of these different social issues have technical aspects to them, and they impinge. The world is becoming so interconnected. Technology is affecting every aspect of our lives. There's no topic educationally that you could talk about that doesn't impinge in this area. And so by sprinkling that across the curriculum is exactly what we're advocating happen. You really start to reach that level where people understand, oh, this is all connected. This isn't some ivory tower group of people sitting off by themselves, not connected to the rest of society, doing bad things to us, and we can't control it. They're us. And, I can be them, and, they're my neighbors, and it's all part of the same thing. But you're right, it is at the foundational level, an educational process that needs to start as early as possible, middle school, K through 6, from there on up.
But to speak to your point, though, I do think that people like everybody on this panel, yourself included, takes on a role of mentoring, right? Because millennials are thirsty for knowledge, right? And yes, it does come from social media, or it does come from quick access, but we also need to take this tone. I read this horrible thing on LinkedIn where someone didn't want to mentor a young person by providing contacts and growth promotion. But everybody in this room is, has something to share, and you have to take a millennial under your wing in the cyberspace and in culture, in professionalism, and take your passion that you have and share it, because they are only as good as who you are. That is my biggest thing, is just keeping it going and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah.
That's very important.
Yeah, one comment as we get through. Dr. McDuffie, great third-party endorsement for NSA. I was General Alexander's Director of Communications on the cybercom side. What we had to overcome was a culture of non-engagement. I agree with you. Mom and Pop, they did phenomenal work, but the problem is it's hard to toot your own horn, because that's the culture that they grow up in, the signal intelligence, and things of that nature. So, good third-party endorsement. We did some great work over there, but it's just hard to communicate that.
Absolutely. Scientists and engineers are the worst PR people.
Communication skills.
Yeah, that goes back to communication skills.
Communication skills.
We are pulling up on our time. I know we started late, so I know some of our panelists have other commitments. I'd like to thank our keynoters and panelists and all of you for coming. And we find this has been kind of a rousing discussion. I'm really sorry to cut it off at this point, but we do, in deference, we do know that some people have to move on for the rest of the day. Thank you.